Hello, this is Lisa Hayes, your host for Dreams for Society, and with me today is Julia Vaughn. Julia is the Policy Director for Common Cause of Indiana. She has been an advocate for you, for the people's interest, for over 25 years. She started out as a canvasser of Citizens Action Coalition. And Julia, we are so pleased to have you with us today and to share with the viewers your passion for advocating for our interests, the common thread amongst the people, to make sure that the members of the Indiana General Assembly, the men and women, and all public policy holders are aware of what we care about. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Julia, to first give us a bit of a glance into your history, what happened as a child or as a young adult that led you to become an advocate for our interests, and then eventually the policy director of the Common Cause of Indiana.
Sure. Well, thanks for the invitation, Lisa. I appreciate it. Well, I think I've really developed an interest in politics and public service because of my family. Both my grandfather and my dad served as mayor of Madison, Indiana. I'm really proud of Madison. I think it's a great little town, and I'm really happy that my folks had something to do with making it the place that it is today. And so I guess, I never really saw this as a spectator sport. Politics and being involved in one's community is something that I think everybody should do, and that's certainly the example I got from my father and grandfather. I never actually knew my grandfather. He died before I was born, but it's great that he had left a legacy behind in Madison. So I think that's something that is important for people to sort of remember our ancestors in a way that makes you proud. And so, my grandfather's public service is not the only reason that I'm proud to be a Vaughn, but one of the big reasons. And so that's how I got interested. The whole notion of being involved in this area of society was never foreign to me. It just always seemed like something that was familiar and something that I thought was important. And so I guess it's discouraging that not more people are engaged in Indiana. That's one of the big frustrations in my work, is that, in 2014 we had the lowest voter turnout in the country. And so when, you work on grassroots issues, and that most basic way of getting involved for citizens voting, we had the worst turnout in the country. It can be a little frustrating, and you just kind of want to shake the citizens of this state and say, come on, folks, and I know you grew up in sort of the same tradition where it would be unthinkable to miss an election or miss the opportunity to have your say in the civic process. It's bewildering to me that there are people who don't jump at this opportunity to participate. So I think that's how I came to do this kind of work. It just seemed natural to me. I didn't major in political science or anything. I kind of got to it in a roundabout way through canvassing at CAC. But that was a great education. I think if you can knock on a stranger's door and sell them on an idea and then get them to invest in that idea by writing a check for an organization, lobbying and everything that comes after, that's really easy, because canvassing is the hardest job in the world. So
I would think it'd be a tremendously humbling
It is, and you learn how to face rejection, which is was good preparation for my later job lobbying at the General Assembly, because I get a lot of rejection there as well.
Well, you mentioned that Indiana was the lowest turnout in terms of the last general election in 2014. Yeah. I think at 20% voter turnout.
28%. It wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad.
And I wonder what the reasoning is, and I think all of our viewers could probably come up with a lot of different reasons. But what I like about what you're doing as an advocate for the people is you're helping to allow us to feel empowered, that we do have a voice, because so much of the time in the political process, we just stay at home because we don't think our voice matters, much less our vote.
Well, politicians aren't going to solve this problem for us, because
Right.
one of the dirty secrets of politics is that low voter turnout doesn't bother most politicians.
Yes.
They would be happy if
Right.
only their hardcore supporters turned out, the people who were very, very partisan, the hardcore Democrats and the hardcore Republicans.
Yeah.
Independents, make them nervous, and so they just assume they keep it to the folks they could depend on, the regulars. And so, Hoosiers need to, I've been around the State House a long time, and I can remember the things that we've been the worst at: obesity, infant mortality. And those were issues that people rallied around and said, you know what? As Hoosiers, we can do better, and we are going to do better, and we're going to pass public policies to make our rankings rise. I'm not seeing that same kind of concern about voter turnout, and that's very disappointing to me. And in fact, I've seen a lot of people make sort of excuses or poo-poo the statistic and say, oh, well, it just wasn't a very big year. There weren't many interesting races. Are you kidding me?
It's as alarming as the other healthcare issues.
Exactly.
Because it's the health of our existence if we don't speak up.
Well, and it's really about the vibrancy of the democratic process. Again, voting is the least that you can do. We believe that people should be involved in ways far greater than that, by contacting their legislators, by attending public meetings, by really being fully engaged. I know that's hard, and I know that people have lives, and it's very difficult to get that deep into it. But voting is just the bare minimum, and so if we're the worst at that, holy cow, we're not going to get any better at the other things, right? Because it's a stretch to think that people who don't vote are going to contact their legislator.
Right.
If they didn't think their vote was going to make any difference, they certainly don't think that their voice is going to be heard inside the Indiana State House. So I think that, in Indiana is kind of at a crossroads, I think. We had a very interesting legislative session where this RFRA issue was under the radar screen.
And would you spell out for the viewers, RFRA, in case they weren't familiar?
I'm
sure you are, though.
Yeah. If you have been living under a rock for the past 7 or 8 months or so, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, there's a lot of controversy about what it really does, but many of us believe that it would enshrine the right to discriminate against certain kinds of people in Indiana. And, that sort of came as a surprise to a lot of people that the General Assembly had done that. There was certainly a lot of secrecy about how it all went down, and there was a tremendous amount of backlash. And so, we're seeing, and, it's interesting that in some states, perhaps the governor would be facing a recall election. Of course, in Indiana, we don't have that type of thing. And so, we already are a state. We don't use ballot initiatives. We don't have the ability to recall public officials. And so, direct democracy here has never really been embraced. That's not the kind of government that we have. We've always sort of relied on these representatives. And I think a lot of people for many years felt like, okay, those people really are representative of us. I think the RFRA debate made people recognize, wait, maybe they aren't really that representative of us. If they are that more conservative, if they are going to pass this law that says it's okay to discriminate. I mean, I work all over this state, and I know that Hoosiers are basically very good people, welcoming, friendly, not ones to discriminate against people who are unlike them. And so, I think it shook a lot of people up. It gave us a reality check. And hopefully it will make our message, which is basically that democracy is broken here in the Hoosier State for a whole lot of reasons. We think that the passage of RFRA and these other laws that really Hoosiers don't support, it's due to gerrymandering, to this problem of every 10 years when the districts are drawn, they're drawn for partisan reasons, political reasons, not in the public interest. That's what happened in 2011. That's what has led, at least in large part, to the large supermajorities that Republicans now enjoy in the Indiana General Assembly. And, that ship won't be righted. Indiana's not 71% Republican, but that's what the percentage of Republican control in the Indiana House of Representatives is. And so we need a state house that is representative of Hoosiers, not just in partisan terms, but in demographic terms as well. We lag behind in terms of women. Women make up half of the people in this state. They certainly don't make up half of the membership. So, it's all a complicated problem, voter turnout and redistricting, doing it in a way that suits the public interest. But the bottom line is, until Hoosiers really get engaged in these kinds of issues, we're not going to have a more vibrant democracy. And, I've seen people get engaged, but too often it's about issues that immediately impact them. Taxes, insurance, a zoning issue. And the issues that Common Cause works on are process issues. Most people don't run for political office, so you're not impacted by the campaign finance laws. But those are really important. About who gets elected, and of course who gets elected has everything to do with what laws get passed, what issues are dealt with here in Indiana. So these process types of issues, which a lot of people just find very boring and they want to glaze over, they're really, really important to the vibrancy of your democracy. And, I think Indiana's democracy needs a shot in the arm. We need a vitamin boost. We need more energy.
Well, I agree with you, Julia. I feel that the disconnect between the public policy holders and the citizenry, not just in Indiana, but really across the country, is far wider than it ever has been. And it doesn't seem that the voices are represented. It does, and the RFRA was a perfect example. I'm glad you pointed that out. The process, and hats off to you, because being this advocate for the citizenry since 1994 is just a tremendous public service that you provided to us. And it's very important, I agree with you, to advocate for balance in the process, not just in campaign finance, but also in this gerrymandering, which is the ability for the legislators to draw their own districts. And you probably, if you've ever seen a map, they're all over the place. They're not just perfect circles or squares. And so when we don't have the process working for us, then the disconnect becomes far greater. So I applaud you for all of your efforts. And following the template of Dreams for Society, we have what we call Imagine, Visualize, and Create. And we've talked about a couple of issues that I know are dear and near to your heart and of Common Cause of Indiana: campaign finance, gerrymandering. Could you take one issue for us, even though there's a plethora of them, and let's hone in on that, and then describe what it looks like today, and then I'll ask you, after you do that, I'll go into the imagining what it might look like if it were transformed 10 years from now in the process being something that serves us rather than doesn't serve us.
Well, let's talk about campaign finance.
Okay, great.
Right now it's a system where a tiny minority of people participate. As I said, the vast majority of us don't donate one dime to political candidates. The people who do contribute tend to be the wealthiest of us. They also tend to be the folks who are most self-interested in the laws that get passed by our legislature. I'll just focus on the legislature, although we all know this is a huge problem in Washington, D.C. as well. Definitely. And so that's the status quo. It's and I mean, many of these contributors aren't even Hoosiers. The money comes from out of state. It comes from folks like the Republican Governors Association or the Democratic Governors Association. These groups that, what in the world do the governors of other states have an interest in public policy in Indiana? Obviously they don't. It's all about keeping score. Now there are 35 Republican governors versus the 33 that we had before the elections. It's this whole blood sport. And that's really what the campaign finance issue has become. It has become almost impossible to regulate it because the Supreme Court has issued a number of decisions, starting with Citizens United, that says that political money is the same as speech. And so all Americans and even corporations have this unlimited ability to speak with their dollars.
In Indiana, I wanted the viewers to know, too, Julia, that we have one of the most, a conservative state, one of the most liberal campaign finance laws there is.
Anything goes. It's the wild, wild west.
It's the wild, wild west, and essentially anybody or everybody can give unlimited amount of campaign contributions.
And not only do we not really have any laws, but the regulatory process is sort of this wink, wink, nod, nod. It's controlled by the two major political parties, and so we have this dysfunctional agency of Republicans and Democrats that basically just cover each other's back, and so it leads to this wild, wild west, anything goes kind of situation.
So we do have $22,000 corporate limit, but that's for corporations and labor unions. But if you're an LLC or an LLP, then you can get out from under that. And a lot of, it's called the LLC loophole that is pervasive throughout the country.
Yeah.
So really what we have is individuals can give unlimited, political action committees can give unlimited, LLCs, partnerships, LLPs can give unlimited, and we have a really high amount of dollars being spent in Indiana proportionate to our population.
Well, and to the number of competitive races. And again, to get back to the gerrymandering, one of the reasons why we don't have many competitive races is they were drawn to be safe districts.
Wow. So that's the issue today. That's the challenge today, Julia. Thank you for pointing that out, all of the details. If we were to fast forward, kind of a dream here, to the year 2025, 10 years from now, and everything that you could possibly imagine got done, and now this campaign finance process system in Indiana, instead of it being dysfunctional, is now very functional and promotes public servants that listen and represent the concerns of its constituency. How do you feel, before explaining to us what your vision looks like, how do you feel about it? What you see your vision as? How do you feel? What are a few words that come to mind? That
I think I would feel excited and empowered as a citizen.
Empowered as a citizen. Oh, that's so amazing. Share with us what that looks like, what a campaign finance model would look like.
Okay, so the United States Supreme Court has been replaced with a bunch of rational people who understand that political speech is not money.
Okay.
Political speech and money are not the same thing. So what we would have is no private money would be allowed in political campaigns at all. Instead, it would be publicly financed. We, as taxpayers, would fund elections the same way we fund every other public thing, like schools, like fire departments, like police departments. Because think about it, basically campaigns are the hiring processes for our elected officials. Who do we pay firemen and other public officials? Do we allow, the fire alarm companies to sponsor firemen? No, we don't do that, but we allow special interests to sponsor legislators via campaign contributions. So I see a system where we would have public money where you could qualify to run for public office. It wouldn't involve raising any private money from PACs or corporations. You would qualify for these grants of public money by going out and raising a certain number of small $5 contributions from people who could vote for you. So if you were running for state legislature, you would go out, you would find people in your district who supported your candidacy, and you would say, back that up with a $5 check. And so if I'm running for state house, I would have to collect fewer than if I'm running for state senate, a bigger district. If I'm running for governor, I would have to collect more. The higher the office, the bigger grant you would get to run, and so you would have to show, more public support to qualify.
Okay, so instead of just signing your name to a petition, you also give $5.
Right, exactly. Because when you invest money in something, even something as nominal as $5, then you're showing some commitment.
Yeah.
And then so maybe you'll do something else. Maybe you'll make calls for this candidate.
Right.
Maybe you'll go knock on doors. Maybe you'll, encourage your friends. And so it's a way to get people to invest.
So no more than 5.
No, to qualify.
So that we're not going to have special interests all the same.
Exactly, right. Okay. Yeah, and individuals, and it would have to be
Joe citizen, Sally citizen.
That live in your district, not somebody from South Bend or Fort Wayne, but actual voters who are saying, I support this person's candidacy, and I'm going to do it by signing and by giving them $5.
Yeah.
And so people say, well, and that's a way to, people always express concerns about public financing by saying, oh, then every crackpot candidate in town, and, we've had a few of those who, they run for every office and they're not serious candidates. Well, to go out and to have to collect, $505 checks, you've got to be a serious candidate.
Because depending on the office, you have to get a certain amount of people signing the petition.
Right. If you were running for governor, it would be significantly more than 500. But again, show people that you're serious.
Right.
And so then how do we raise the money for public financing? Well, we just dedicate some money from the general fund, but there are various funding streams that we could use to generate additional funds. The same way that we do it for presidential public financing. That system doesn't work very well now because it hasn't been reformed in about 30 years, but the way they raise money for it is ingenious. It's on our income tax forms, right? It's about the third question down. It says, do you want to contribute $3 to the Presidential Public Financing Fund? If we explain to people what that meant, what it's for, what it's meant to alleviate, we would get more people contributing. But you do know that 10% of tax filers actually checked yes?
That's great.
I'm one of them. That is a heck of a lot more than people who write a check to a candidate.
I'm going to make sure my accountant checks the box. I'm not sure he does or not.
People don't understand what it means.
I didn't, I didn't even realize.
And so if the state would do a little bit of education for people and say, this is investing in good government.
Yeah, I should have known that and didn't.
Hey, the vast majority of people, it's, again, it's
not very well publicized.
It's not well publicized at all. In fact, you only hear bad things about the presidential public financing system. And frankly, it doesn't work in the way it was intended to when it was created in the post-Watergate years.
Well, 10%,
but still,
volunteer unsolicited,
less than 1%
when they also
of
hear
people,
it's not working. That's amazing.
That's significant.
Just think how many people would volunteer to contribute
a little bit of
promotion and promotion.
Yeah, a little bit of education.
And then that's outside of the typical tax dollar. Then it's just
Right, that would be a way to sort of supplement. But again, elections are a basic public good. This isn't something that should be financed by the millionaires of our society. If they continue to finance elections, then they will be the ones who continue to be served by government. So if we want this to be inclusive, And I mean, I think, again, I hate to keep coming back to RFRA, but I think that sort of was a basic concern that people had, was that was a divisive thing. That was something that was going to serve to divide Hoosiers. So isn't there one thing in Indiana that we can come together on? And I think funding, a fair and even process for selecting our elected officials should be one of those things. So, there are a handful of states that have public financing of elections. Maine and Arizona are the two that have the longest history.
Okay.
Their citizens have embraced it. Certainly, those two states were not the lowest in terms of voter turnout. They weren't anywhere in the bottom 10. So I think they found a way to encourage their citizens to invest in the process. And, as I mentioned earlier, the process is extremely important in what you get in the end result. If you have a process that is flawed, that is controlled by a few people that only hears a few voices, then we're not going to have a state where, people want to be, where the people are proud of being, that people can really achieve their dreams.
Right.
And so, it may seem like, that's something that would never be embraced in Indiana, but we've really got to try some creative solutions. And again, it can't be Republicans and Democrats who are only working on the solution. It's got to be about all of Indiana, about everybody participating.
The voices of all of you out there, we working together, that's what it's all about, the people power.
It has to be.
The public servants are here to serve us. It's not the other way around.
Exactly. And, a lot of people are very... It's difficult when you work for Common Cause because you want people to be outraged, but you don't want them to be cynical. And so that's what I always have to reiterate, that while the process is dominated by big money and by a few well-connected lobbyists, and that is all true, because so few people participate in the process, you will be heard. Now, that's not saying that your legislator will do what you want, but the communication they get from citizens, particularly something that is more than a mass email, a handwritten letter, a phone call, approaching them when you see them in the grocery store. I mean, that's the best way, is a personal contact. Certainly not to be defensive or confrontational. I criticize our public officials a lot, and I think it's justified the vast majority of the time. But again, I respect what they do, and so I have to respect their position.
Right.
And so, again, you get what you give, and so I think that the best way to communicate to people is face-to-face, but, be polite and respectful. But people... if you will participate, I think most people who do come away from the experience feeling better for it. I mean, if nothing else, you can vent your frustrations by writing that letter or sending that email. But unfortunately, in Indiana, we just don't have as much civic participation as we need. I think it shows. And so if people would just get the bug, and I found that a lot of people really enjoy it. Once they start feeling a part of the process, it is a pretty exciting place to be. It's always interesting. You learn a lot, and you're doing something that is significant and meaningful. So.
Yes, I think it's important for all of us to understand that we do belong to the political system. It may be a bit daunting to walk the halls of the State House and not know where anything is or who anybody is. But we are part of the political process, and our voices are needed. And with that, Julia, I see that really there aren't that many things that have to be done to have this to be created in 10 years. It's not really a financial issue. It's just the willingness.
But certainly, I mean, how much is our surplus? Our state has money. We're just not spending it.
Right.
Or we're not spending it on the right things. And so, again, I haven't sensed a real commitment to work on voter turnout or these types of issues inside the State House, but that's because the status quo works for them. Voters have to figure out, hey, low voter turnout impacts me. I may not be the person who's running, but that's impacting the public policies that are getting dealt with at our State House, in Congress, in town governments across this state. Right. So I think it's about taking ownership.
Definitely taking ownership.
We've got a problem here in Indiana, and each citizen, if you're a voter, great, but I'm sure you know people who don't vote. And so we've all kind of got to take this on as our responsibility and light a fire under people and say, election coming up later this year, are you registered? I mean, those are things, the potential of the National Voter Registration Act. That's actually the first issue that I worked on when I started back in 1995. And it has great potential. It has really changed where people register to vote. More register at the BMV than any place else.
Right.
But it hasn't raised the level of participation. And that tells me that it's more than a question of convenience. It's people have to think that their vote makes a difference.
Exactly. And I know that if more people were registered, they might vote. However, just getting yourself registered today seems to be daunting for some people. I know that in some states, I think Washington State, you're actually automatically registered when you get
Oregon just passed that law.
When you get your driver's license.
Yes, it's automatic voter registration. We've been advocating that at the national level, and unfortunately that's likely to never happen. Elections vary widely across this country, but that's another big problem.
Right.
In most democracies, you have election laws that are standardized across the country. We have 50 different ways of running elections, and that came really in the glare of publicity with the 2000 presidential campaign. Yes. We addressed a few really technical issues, the whole hanging chat and the voting technology that caused problems, but we didn't really attack the systemic. And again, this idea of it doesn't matter if I vote or not, because even if the guy I'm voting for wins, he still won't listen to me.
Right.
So, but again, I understand the frustration that people have. I mean, believe me, I get it, in my face at the State House a lot. But, again, it's that idea of taking ownership.
Yes.
That this is our state, that it's our responsibility what happens. And if the legislature that's currently in charge isn't listening to us, then it's our responsibility to elect others who will. Now, recognizing that it's easier said than done, and so to do that, we're going to have to change the basic way that our electoral system works in Indiana. We're going to have to find a way to finance campaigns that is fair and inclusive. We're going to have election day procedures that enfranchise people and don't disenfranchise them. And then the whole redistricting thing. We need to give people a reason to go to the polling place. We need to give them real choices, and that means competitive elections.
I agree. And the bottom line is, however, I think the theme here is it all starts with us.
Right.
If the people start to speak up, just like they did with RFRA, if they start to speak up on everything, become aware of what's happening. It may be painful at first, but also, as you said, not to become cynical, we can't fight fire with fire.
Right.
We must be pleasant about it, speak our will, and speak our piece, give our ideas to our public servants. I think really, truly, everyone in the Indiana General Assembly wants, in the end of the day, wants to be popular with their constituency. They will do what the majority, at the end of the day, what the majority of their constituents want. So it's incumbent upon us to speak up.
Right.
And we don't have to change a thing. We don't have to change the campaign finance law. We don't have to change the gerrymandering law. If we can get you all, us, to speak up on a daily basis, to engage with our local legislators.
And to know the issues. I mean, RFRA was the exception. That got national news coverage, so everybody knew about it. But most issues fly under the radar screen.
They do.
When I first started doing this work, the State House basement was full of newspaper reporters from around the state. The Terre Haute paper, the Marion paper, everybody had a State House reporter. They don't anymore. Right. The amount of news coverage on television has declined. They can spend 15 minutes on the weather, but 2 on the Indiana General Assembly. So, I know it's hard, but whatever issue you care about, well, I can't say that, but most issues that you probably care about, there is probably an organization that's working on it. And so you contact them. All organizations want engaged citizens. I can't think of one that doesn't welcome an engaged citizen who wants to be informed and who wants to interact with legislators. So again, it's all about recognizing the problem and saying, you know what, I play a part in this, and I'm going to do my part to help fix it.
We're all part of this challenge of finding ways to reform systems, processes that better serve us. And with that, Julia, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and enlightening us about what we can do. And simply speak up. Speak up and participate. You don't have to always vote. Voting would be great, but the real power you have is speaking up.
That's right.
Thank you, Julia.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.